Welcome to another in our podcast series. This is a co-production of the Dolby Institute and the Soundworks Collection. I'm Glenn Kiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute. And this is one of our On the Road to the Oscars podcast. We're shining a spotlight on the movies that have been nominated for Best Sound Editing. And I'm thrilled to be here with Mark Mangini and David White, who are nominated this year for Mad Max Fury Road. So thank you for coming in and talking with us.
Yeah!
V8.
How good is that?
Give me a V8. Come on.
So,
V8.
Thank you.
So,
That's from the
so
movie.
Just in full disclosure, we're catching these guys right after we're at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills. These guys have just come from the nominees lunch, which is people tell me it's the most fun part of the process.
It is
right?
mind-blowingly fun.
And David,
So
this
much
is your
fun.
first. This is your first nomination, right?
Absolutely. I was saying before, it's like being married because everyone around you is going, yay!
It is a wedding. It's like going to a great
Everyone
wedding.
is happy
with
for
famous people. Of the wedding with famous people.
And they're all at a wedding too.
Right.
You know? It's like
And everybody's happy for you.
And then
Because
we're
everybody
all going to make love.
because everybody's a winner now, right?
Today,
right.
yeah.
Today,
Yeah,
right?
today.
And in 3 weeks or so, it'll be another story.
That room at the Dolby Theater can be. There's a lot of angst in that room.
It can be a brutal
envelopes
thing,
are
right?
Opened.
Well,
I
and
must
you
say,
and Mark, this is your
my
fourth nomination, right?
And sounds so disingenuous, but I'll say it anyways. But that moment, as the opening of the envelope gets closer, is the most anxiety-ridden. Honestly, there have been moments when I felt like, I don't want to be me right now. And of course I want to be me. I've just been nominated. I'm out of my mind.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's like, is it going to be me? What if it isn't? Am I going to be able to handle the disappointment? What if I win? Right?
Yeah, well,
Are you ready?
I mean, I already feel like that, just the fact that we're nominated against Revenant and The Martian.
It's a
Star
tough year this
Wars.
year.
Oh my
It's a
God!
tough year
Thank
this
you,
year.
thank you for rubbing it in.
Right?
Come on, they're amazing soundtracks.
Yeah, extraordinary.
I don't want to say what my favourite is out of them, but there are 4 really great soundtracks there. So
And one exceptional one.
and we are going to we might.
I can't even tee him up with this guy. Would you listen to me, please?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer your question actually.
All right, thanks.
And so when those envelopes are getting opened, yeah, you're right. It's probably going to be the most anxiety-filled moment of my life, but I've got to just remind myself that we're already winners. The fact
Oh my
that we're
God,
already
are you
there. I
kidding?
mean, it's an
Just to
old
be
story,
there.
that thing, but I mean, it's just extraordinary to be in that company. I mean, these are people that I admire deeply
Right.
doing soundtracks, and they're great soundtracks. So what a privilege.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Okay, so I'm just
But
gonna
geez, it's gonna be awesome when we win it.
Would it be?
So I'm just going to sit here and observe. You guys you've got a kind of a married couple vibe going. You guys have clearly.
Right? you must know
It seems
what
like
we
you
have
guys.
to go through.
It seems like you guys have worked together for a long time, but this is the first movie that you've done together, right?
It is, but because you've been in this business a long time, the hell and the torture
Yes,
that we put each
yes,
other through in the course of one film.
Yeah.
Some couples, some couples do that over the course of a lifetime. We get all that.
It all gets compacted.
It all get compacted
compressed.
into.
Sure.
Well, and
period.
especially with a film like this, right? So, David, how did you get involved with the movie?
I got called up by George early on. The person he normally uses to do films was busy on another film. Mm-hmm. And I'd just done a film called The Railway Man, where there was a whole lot of psychological themes going on in the character, which George had heard about. He hadn't seen the film. But that's why he rang me, because he knew that I'd sort of just tried to tell a story like that with sound. Mm-hmm. So he offered it to me, and I didn't know whether to say yes.
So was
And
that
now in retrospect,
Glad I said yes to it.
was that before the movie was shot, or at what point in the process?
No,
was
they'd shot the film. They still hadn't shot the opening and the closing of the film, all of the stuff
see.
around the Citadel.
Right.
But they'd shot all the footage for the main bulk of the film.
For the whole chase sequence across the desert.
And
yeah.
they'd edited, most of the first spool. The first, say, 16 minutes was pretty tight.
we say real in this country.
Oh, okay, first reel. Minus the head, so there was no Citadel sequence. And the rest of the film, like spool reel 3. Reel 2.
I'll translate for you.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm going to start talking in inches in any second. It was all just sort of very much an assembly stage.
Yeah.
It was a very big project, something like 450 hours worth of footage. So the
56 terabytes of picture data, Margie, the editor, just told me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, Mark, how did you get on board this movie?
George rung me up to come to Sydney to work with David and just help him get his idea of the sound of the movie on the screen.
So you guys started in Sydney?
He started in Sydney, and then I got brought in to join the crew and just continue to work to like make it a big tentpole soundtrack.
But you guys mixed the picture here at Warner Brothers.
We mixed both. We started in Sydney and then moved it to LA and ended up at Warner Brothers Dub 10.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it went through so many iterations, this film. So I had my gear, my studio set up over at Kennedy Miller where George has his editing room and all that. And I was set up there for about 12 months.
You were on this movie for 12 months?
I was on it for 14 months.
Wow.
But during that time, I mixed the whole film 6 times. And then we went out to stage 1.
It gets better.
I know. And it's such a big movie.
And
you can actually say bigger than Ben-Hur with this film.
Right.
In terms of the soundtrack. It was just so ginormous. We needed Mark. Absolutely needed him. And thankfully he came along, as well as Greg and
Chris Jenkins and Greg Rudoloff were our re-recording.
You guys had you had an A team working on this.
We had the best of everything. And not only do we have the best of everything in terms of personnel, but we had the support of George in the studio to pretty much let us do what we wanted to do. And while it might be dangerous to say this, we final mixed for 75 days.
That is amazing.
That's unheard of. But you can see the result in the soundtrack. The detail, the clarity, the dynamics are all there because we spent so much time. And that included, by the way, the Atmos Printmaster and other formats. But that wasn't all final mix.
Let me ask you this. I mean, how as the process went, because oftentimes, as you know, you spend a lot of time during the mix, and especially the final mix, just chasing picture that's been constantly updated, and new visual effects and stuff coming in.
He bore the brunt of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the least enjoyable part of it because it's a distraction from anything that's actually advancing the soundtrack at all. So if you can imagine trying to do a temp mix of a film that big, 2 systems, and then they make changes and you've got to reconform all of that stuff and then fix up all those bits, and then there are new visual effects you've got to add to those. So you're not really just, here's a crash, I'm just going to work on this crash today. Yeah. Or I just want to do the chain for here today. You can't do that. You're constantly having to multitask and stuff. And so...
Well, you're not being creative. You're
not really being creative.
You're just keeping the movie in sync.
Yeah. It slows the whole process down. And thankfully Mark came along and that problem disappeared very quickly.
What's your secret, Mark? How did you make that problem go away?
Everybody's been asking me this.
Well, I kind of just finished that thought though, because when we went out to stage 1, we still had another temp mix to do, which was just stage 1 is in Sydney, our biggest studio in Sydney. And we had to do another temp mix, and we're running out of time, and how are we ever going to get this finished? Oh my God, can we get some more help, please, somehow? And Mark came along with Greg and Chris, and it made it a whole lot easier.
Sure.
But in spite of that, we were beyond capacity with the film. And in talking to Mark last night, it sounds like it reached full capacity at Warner Brothers here as well. I mean, it is just a very, very large
it's a big
soundtrack.
movie. It's a big
we
movie.
ended up at stage 10 at Warner Brothers on a two tower. They're one of the big DFC, twin. Split desk, twin tower, and we still maxed it out. I think we were 2,048 inputs. It was crazy the amount of material we had.
That is just amazing.
I know. By the way, I'm not bragging. I'm not trying to lay that down as like bragging rights. There's no pride for me in like excess and like look at all the shit we cut and created. Yeah. Because in fact, we actually had the opposite process to achieve, which was to figure out a way to find focus and winnow that all down.
Well, I wanted to, that's actually a really good segue into what I wanted to ask you guys about, because I really listened to the film again over the weekend because I knew that we were going to be talking, and I would certainly never call this a minimal track, but it's really focused. There's not a lot of stuff competing for your attention. It's very specific. So, I mean, all of the stuff to one side about how many tracks and the weeks and all that kind of stuff. But I want to ask you guys conceptually, creatively, what was some of the bigger challenges for you on the film?
Oh, certainly my biggest one was the Max Headspace stuff, which is the story about what's going on in his head. He looks pretty odd
Yeah.
as he's moving around.
So you're talking about those sort of micro flashbacks that would happen, or
That's part of it.
That's a part, but this whole the sequence where he comes out of the dirt and moves forward with the door and everything, and sees
pulls the IV.
Time. There's a whole lot of effects going on Foley effects and stuff like that. Backwards delays and all sorts of things. They're only just there.
Yeah.
But he perceives things in a sort of hyper-real mode.
Right.
And it took ages to work out what it was that was going to sound natural, but just slightly.
And that was a process you put on a lot of like realistic effects. That wasn't just like flashbacks. There were real sounds that would have just been like Foley-like sounds that you processed to give that what we call the headspace effect to sort of mirror this sort of unstable mental state that he's in.
Yeah, we had the part that you can hear them the most is when he first gets into the cab and he's collecting things. And, there's the file's got this doubly beat thing on it and triple delays and all sorts of stuff on the things you touch. So the audience probably wouldn't really notice that. You don't want the audience to notice these things. You want them to just be in the story. Yeah. And at that part of the story, Max is pretty frenetic. So just those sort of sounds, I felt, just sort of supported his mental state.
Sound of storytelling.
Was that something? Did you guys talk with George Miller, the director, about that?
George
just tell me a little bit about like how was your collaboration process with George?
Well, whilst I was with George over those long months, I would say that George was the sound designer because he has an eye for detail like no one I've ever met in my life.
And an ear for detail, I might add. We'll get to that.
So he's extremely specific about what he wants, and will repeat it to make sure that that he really does want that to be the sound. Very clear.
In a very lovely way. Let's be clear.
And we'd have these meetings and we'd video them all of the sound briefs, and we'd just brief like 30 seconds of the film, and we'd be talking for 2 hours about it.
So you would go to his space and you would sit down, and it's not
he'd
really
either come and sit in my studio.
You would call that the spotting session,
yeah,
right?
That sound brief is just a different way to say spotting session.
Spotting session.
Yeah.
So we do that either in my room or in Margie's room or in the common room there, just with the television.
I never asked, did you ever get the voice memos?
That's voice memos.
George is, and I say this in a very loving way, because when George would be in like his creative mode, like in that sort of beta state,
the ideas are going to come whenever they're going to come.
They just come, and so he would never want to lose a good idea. So if it was 2 a.m. after having left the mix, he'd do a voice memo and then he'd send them to us. Yeah, and I have collection. We both have collections of these, right?
And they are classic.
Oh, they're beautiful.
You can tell that he's thinking hard. I mean, yours is probably similar, but I pick up the phone and he goes, "Now, Dave." And he just start riffing on this chain of thought that he's on in such detail.
It is truly train of thought.
And you're going, wow.
What's fascinating, because it's hard to talk about sound.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's not a lot of language for it.
But George has the language, for sure.
Yeah.
Does he talk about, is he talking to you about it in emotional terms or musical terms? Or
he did with me.
How does he communicate to you what he's looking for?
The big revelation with George on this film for me was that my sound briefs, our spotting sessions together, would be revolving around plot and narrative. He was not a micromanager. He would never say, I want
at this point, do a sound
skid here. I want the self-evident stuff as well as maybe the non-self-evident stuff. But he really wanted to allow me to collaborate and contribute. So he would say, at this beat, this is what Furiosa is feeling. This is where the story is headed. Even though the scene feels like we're taking a detour, this is what she wants to achieve. So he would talk in narrative terms, and then he'd ask, how does sound support that?
Right.
And then it was really up to us to do something creative. We were allowed to have those same epiphanies on our own without being micromanaged. And that's really rare.
Yeah, it's totally rare. And
it takes a director who's really secure.
Yeah, he's very secure. He knows what he wants.
Right. Well, he's a great filmmaker, right?
Oh, he's the bomb.
Yeah, he is.
There's only one George Miller.
You mentioned focus and detail as you re-reviewed the movie. One of the first things that George did with me when I arrived was he explained this concept of top of the pyramid. And Wayne drew a whiteboard of it for me. And this was George's way of saying, I know that at any given moment, our movie is visually dense. Any frame of this movie is ridiculously dense visually. So how can we help the audience understand what to look at with sound? And so he would always say, that's what I call the top of the pyramid. There's probably one sound, maybe two, that is our focus. And it was always our job during the mix to find that one sound that was telling that story beat for those 10 frames or 10 feet. And then there might be two supportive sounds just below it. And then there's the other 10,000 sounds that were also prepared that we had to make irrelevant until such time as we decided story focus is somewhere else. So you needed those elements.
You might sneak a hint of something in.
Right, and there'd be supporting stuff.
But one of the things I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a point on top of the pyramid because I've had to suffer it for quite a long
I
time.
know you did.
Yeah.
I know you did.
Yeah, George said to me, it's this top of the pyramid. I went, okay, right, I'm on. I said, so we're not talking just about, car sounds, are we? We're talking about like
Everything.
every sound.
No, it's everything.
Pyramid. He's going, yeah. And I said,
It means dialogue
and
too.
he said, I want to be able to access those. Like, I want just 3 tracks with top of the pyramid sound. And I'm going,
Well, that's a bit naive.
oh no! How do we try and manage this need of being able to easily get to them?
Right.
I mean, we know how to get to it because when you organise things, you can do that.
Right.
But trying to find a balance between just how you would ordinarily go about laying something, and satisfying George's request of what's on the top of the pyramid track.
Right.
Well, and this that may be the answer to the question I wanted to pose to you guys, which was I think there's an old saying in our business: see a sound, hear a sound.
Yeah, see a dog, hear a dog is the way I heard it.
Right, exactly. So that literally means if there's something happening on the screen, you cover it with a sound. You cover it off with a sound effect.
Right.
But one of the things that really popped at me again when I was looking at the film, and I think I didn't notice it the first time I saw the film because I was in the film, which is great. Excellent. But the second time, and I was really kind of focusing on the sound, there are all these really interesting moments in the it's called the war
rig is the name of her truck.
Right. So you'll be in the cab of the war rig. And I'm expecting that I'm going to be hearing a lot of machinery going on. I'm hearing a lot of wind. I'm hearing like wheels on. But none of that's there, and they're having these really emotional, intense conversations. But the miking is really close, and the tone
Totally
is really intimate. So I was really curious about how that came about, because that's obviously not a literal representation of what would be happening in that world, but it's emotional.
George would those scenes in spools 3 and 4. George would say, this is critical information for the audience. She's talking about the green space and her backstory. The truck sounds are completely irrelevant to that moment. And so much so that that's all ADR because he wanted the intimacy of ADR.
Right.
And the audience doesn't need to be reminded they're still in a truck.
Right.
Nobody needs to hear those things. Yeah. This is all about focus and top of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid there was dialogue and story.
Yeah.
Take out the truck. We got lots of quiet moments like that. Absolutely intentional and created. And you have to remember, quiet and silence is a choice. It's not an accident. Yeah. It's not that we were lazy.
Sure.
It's funny, so many people have said to me, gee, it's a loud film. But there are actually a lot of sections of the film that are really quite
almost
sparse.
All of Spool 5 and the nighttime stuff with the Vuvellini, that's really, and in fact, no background sounds. Yeah. Almost dead quiet.
Let's talk a little bit about ADR and the production tracks. Obviously that must have been a tough shoot out there.
Ben Osmo handled all the sound recording.
Right.
With quite a large team. And
under brutal conditions, right?
So
the desert of Namibia,
boiling,
blowing
and freezing,
stuff up,
dust everywhere. Every day there was a massive cleaning job for him and his crew to be doing. And because it's real filming, they'd have to get cars up to speed over 8 kilometres, and Ben, because of the radio frequencies, has got to drive along as well. So he's in a van going 80 kilometres or 60 miles an hour.
Was any of that stuff usable for you guys?
Oh well, we're talking about Ben Osmo. This guy is incredible.
Yeah, and the Osmotron. Have you read his article on the Osmotron?
No.
The truck that he built to do all the communications and the hundreds of channels of mics that are on actors. A crew that had to communicate with each other. You got to look up the Osmotron.
That's awesome. It's extraordinary. But not only did he mic everybody and plant mics in the cab and all over the shop, he put them in the back of the war rig tanker so that you could hear the tanker sliding around the back and one underneath.
Sure.
He mic'd everything. You know?
Yeah, extraordinary
So
work.
There were some scenes where we were able to retain the sync sound. You know, scenes where things weren't
Probably
noisy.
less than most films.
Oh, yeah. Oh, way less than most films, I think. Because they're real vehicles. So anything filmed on a moving vehicle, it's ADR.
Right.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
None of that stuff is the sync sound.
Right.
But there are some scenes where there are little bits of sync sound used, such as those quiet scenes on Reel 5, you know, where they're talking about the green space. And
Yeah. That's all ADR.
nighttime.
Yeah. So
that one's all ADR?
Yeah.
What about the one before it's nighttime?
all ADR.
All of it.
All ADR.
Well,
Which is just is a testament to how great the ADR is. So, you said something that I wanted to follow up on, because I think a lot of filmmakers really hate looping. They hate the ADR stage. They hate the whole process. They feel like it's not. But
And
you
rightfully.
said but you said something interesting, which was George saw ADR as an opportunity
That's
to
an
actually
opportunity
to
for
get
him.
to get a more intimate performance.
Yeah, he wanted and George does something that I've never seen a director do, and that is he spends weeks, months with his ADR team. And what he'll do is he'll record every character. He'll do 20, 30 takes with a character and never make a select take. Usually on the set, the director will say, I love that, takes 4.
Yeah.
He won't do that on the ADR stage the way most directors do. He'll wait till he comes back into post. He'll sit with the ADR editor, and he'll sometimes make literally like a ransom note out of those, hundreds and hundreds of takes of any given actor to find, to fabricate.
He'll craft a new
Yeah,
take.
he'll craft the absolutely perfect performance, painstakingly.
Interesting.
My first ADR day with George. So I'd recorded this ADR, and he's come up to my room, and he's just come out of visual effects or something, and he says, "Play take 1." So I play take 1, take 2. So I played through 20 or 30 takes, and he said, "Okay, I want the first part from take 7, second part from take 13,
That's the way it works.
and the last word from take 29."
He can keep all that in his head.
Yeah,
You would not believe it.
And
You
so I go
across
okay.
multiple characters.
Do that, and I play it. And he goes, "Was that take 13 for the middle part?" I go, "Oh, sorry, George, I
He
made a
caught
mistake."
me.
You were kidding.
No,
He's extraordinary.
he's unbelievable.
He's such a focused man.
Well, because I read about him, he actually got his start in film editing. So I think that's part of
He got, where he got his start? As a doctor, as a GP.
Well, exactly.
And I might add,
into film.
my second.
So he's detail oriented.
Did you have to do some treatment on it?
Did I?
No, I don't.
I
know
thought you
about
were
it.
with me. Can I tell a story?
Yeah.
Of course you can.
Second week, we're working 24/7, and they're catering meals every day. And by the second week, I was a little tired of lamb. And we walked.
This is in Sydney?
This
or?
is in Sydney. I'm in Sydney. And I thought you were with me. It must have been somebody else. We walked by the caterer who was setting out lunch. And whoever I was walking with said, "What's for lunch today?" And I said, "That's probably the lamb." And the caterer all of a sudden popped up her head.
Oh, no.
The next day, I got food poisoning. So I had we are on a deadline like you cannot believe. So I had to go to George. I'm literally holding my belly. I said, "George," I didn't know he was a doctor. I said, I gotta go. And he said, "Hang on a second." And he did one of the, like a movie moment. He swept everything off the lunch table, the communal lunch table. He said, "Lie down." And he pulls my shirt off.
Did an
this.
exam right
He started
there.
squeezing my innards, and he gave me a prescription, and he told me what to do, and he said, "Come back in 2 days. Good luck. I hope you feel better." How many directors
he can
are
still-
like,
he can
"Don't
still-
pull your shirt off and wiggle around with your guts"? That's George Miller.
That's a great story.
So what was your question?
I don't even remember.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sidetrack.
Well, I mean, we gotta
David.
look. I mean, obviously, we have to talk about cars, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how it's obviously a post-apocalyptic thing, but there are recognizable sort of elements from cars in the production design. How did you guys go about building this? I'm sure I presume it was a big library.
Say a couple of things about the cars, right? Or actually, George wanted this film. It's all found objects, So civilization's essentially come to an end to a degree, hasn't it? And so everything there's no power stations and all that. So it's just things that they can cobble together and make work. One of those things is a combustion engine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. So they had to be combustion engines. They couldn't be anything other than a combustion engine. And George wanted it to be entirely believable, like plausible, what was going on. And an example of that is, when the war rig's on fire and the the doohickey goes down and the
And the
dust
sand comes up and right.
Okay. We were watching that scene, and Rick Lyle, who's one of the sound editors, was there, and George goes, "So is that believable?" And Rick just sort of went, "Nah, that wouldn't happen because the dirt's going to come up and go into the manifold and
Stall out the engine or whatever.
It's not going to work." And George goes, "Oh, no, we've got a shot. We've got a shot of the things closing on the
manifold's opening.
Next day, that's cut in, so the dirt, as the dirt comes up, cut to that shot, it shuts, come out, they open up again. Yeah. Plausible.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
So it had to be, it really had to be really real. So that was, in one way, I found in the early days, anyway, I don't know how it travelled, but in the early days, I found it actually quite restrictive. Because, I see something fast, and I lay like a Formula One engine underneath it, or a jet, or, something to make it
something literally fast.
Yeah, there's something that we identify as fast. You put those things in there, even low level, and the audience reads them as, oh, this is something fast. So I felt a little bit hamstrung around that. But the great thing about the vehicles, and this is the last general thing I'll say before you, Mark, is that all of the vehicles are characters as well. They all have names.
That was a principle of ours, is that they should be as distinct as Furiosa and Max.
Yeah, there's a whole, printed out thing of the names of the cars.
Right. Yeah, they all have names. That's right, like characters.
Yeah. All of them have got names. Even
the people eater,
the pole cars, the fire cats, the buzzards. The rock riders. Everything has a name and has a bit of a backstory to it. Fortunately or unfortunately, so like the buzzards, rattly things with sharp doohickeys all over. That's how they look, and that's how we wanted them to sound. I'm doing all the blabbing, but they went a long way beyond where we started. A long way beyond, because we'd started with source sounds that Ben had recorded,
and Oliver as well.
And Oliver, that's right.
Machin, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I actually haven't met him, so.
But he was an entirely separate second unit sound effects guy. During production, while Oliver was trying to capture sync sound, whenever they could free up a vehicle, Oliver and his team of sound effects recordists were off in another part of the desert capturing all of those vehicles, doing these multi-channel recordings.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Who spends that kind of money and time for sound in production? No one but George Miller.
Yeah.
Now, we tried to follow that idea to its sort of logical conclusion. By the time we get to, and I discussed this with Michael some time ago, by the time we get to the big chase in spool 6 and 7, or all of spool 6 really, I started to see that as Moby Dick. I mean, the visual references are there, the harpoons, and
the harpoon, the tank at the war
obsessed rig. Captain who is a Morton Joe. He's Ahab. And so we started to blend in whale sounds to try to affect that analogy.
And the animal sounds bring a life to it.
Bring them anthropomorphize.
Right.
It brings the war rig to life. We thought that was, and then the closing sequence. Arguably a scene that should have been like a big crash and boom and explosion moment when Nux, whips the war rig into a 90-degree turn to block the pass.
Right.
That might have been an opportunity for us to do our biggest crashes and explosions, but I saw it as a very poetic, almost operatic moment. So I pitched to George the idea that should be the death song of the war rig, the death of the great white whale. So that really is only populated by slowed down animals, dying animal sounds. Well, they're not actually dying. We didn't kill any animals. No animals were harmed.
Quick to say.
Right.
But you used animal vocalizations.
Yeah, but we used animal to anthropomorphize that word to make it feel like the beast is dying. And we kind of eschewed the metal crashes and all those kinds of things that one might normally use.
That to me, that's the fun part of sound design, is using non-literal elements to get it sort of a deeper emotional truth.
And you've got to be crafty with that sort of stuff, because you don't want the audience to go, oh, listen to the whale. So there's still got to be some sort of, whether there's a metal sound or an engine sound or whatever's in there, just for the audience's perspective still has to be that it's part of the movie, you know.
But you did something brilliant, Dave. My favorite sound moment in the movie is when Max is coming up out of the sand right after the storm sequence, and there's all that beautiful detailed stuff as he rises out of the sand. But then I loved that you externalized the IV sound. Yeah, like you would never hear that, but you hear the and then this great sound as he pulls the plug. Yeah. You don't hear that, but it tells the audience his connection, his obsession with his use as a blood bag, as just a donor. That was that's
right. He has a pretty rough trot, doesn't he?
He gets it's a brutal movie for him. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the music for the film. And how did you guys interact with the music team at all, or what?
I don't know your side of it with Tom. I spent a great deal of time with Tom actually. Well, you go first.
Okay. Well, I was obviously involved with Tom during all the temp mixes, and Bob Batamy.
Yeah. The music editor.
Bob Batamy is the music editor, and the composer was
Tom Hulkenborg, aka Junkie XL.
Junkie XL.
Right.
And it was great that he was. I mean, again. Who brings on a composer like 15 months prior to the end of the film? Yeah. You know, so...
Well, part of that's baked into the script because obviously you've got a character who's playing music as part of the cars.
But that was a very de minimis portion of it. Tom was writing major themes and suites and huge sections of the movie, even as Margie was constructing them editorially.
That's right. So for all those temps, you know, Tom would deliver... Or Bob would deliver more music, mix all that stuff in, which was fantastic for George in the process. Because he was able to, you know, go, this is working, that's Tom, can we change this and stuff. And they had a terrific relationship, the two of them, in terms of communication of what George was after and what Tom was able to produce. It was quite beautiful to watch, really. Tom was... The music for the film is... It's a separate entity, like an opera, almost.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it drives the movie, not just to give us some impetus, but like it's a whole character arc in itself. You know, the way it speaks to Max's character in particular. So, you know, it was from my perspective as an editor and a mixer, it was a phenomenal relationship that I had with the music department.
And it's so rare that you have all that material to work with as well. Normally, when you're cutting sound effects, you have no idea.
We have the real score to work against, so we can be very detailed with our mixes, knowing they're going to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, one of the great successes I had, and maybe this is because it's part of the fact that I came in later, I hit it off with Tom right off the bat. I don't know if it's because I'm a musician. He and I just hit it off. We went to coffee every single day of the mix. He and I would just meet for a flat white in and around Sydney, and we would talk about the movie, and we developed a really close relationship, so close that we got to the point where we were really talking as collaborators about the way the soundtrack, our shared soundtrack, should sound. And we started finding those successes, those top of the pyramid moments, interdisciplinarily. Yeah. Tom started to get very forthcoming with me and say, you know what, Mark, George is really pushing that cue in the chase in Reel 6. I really want to pull it back here. What do you got? Do you think that's something, you know, your department can sort of take over with? And we started having those discussions on a very regular basis. And I'm sure you know from all of these kinds of interviews, it's a very common kind of, you know, there's a rub there between the composer and the sound department. And there doesn't need to be. Sometimes all there needs to be is common understanding. And that's what Tom and I developed. And we would go to the mix every day with sort of a menu of things for George and say, hey, how about we just take out all of the war rig there? What if we take out the string section, but we keep the pads? You know, and we would have those very detailed, focused discussions every day. And that's part of how I think we found that great those great dynamics in the mix. Yeah. Because we had a relationship and we had the time to do it.
Yeah. And it was beautifully prepared. I mean, the way that Tom actually came to the mixing board.
That's because there's nobody else like him.
You could access anything and do any changes that whatever George wanted to do or Mark wanted to do. Everything was possible. We one of my other favorite moments in it, and this is the kind of cooperation we had, after Max has ripped the door off, he's in the desert and he's heading towards the war rig for the first time. He's chained to the door and to Nux. And so we hear this banging, and we cut to a close-up of Furiosa banging on the filter. And
that segues beautifully into the taiko drums that Tom had in the score. That was an epiphany in the mix. That was not written, that was not scripted. That was something that I heard in the mix, and I said to Bob Badamy, I love the drums, but you're about 20 seconds late for me. We could have this really cool transition because she's going bang, 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 boom, 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 and we go into taiko drums, and it made this just beautiful transition. So Bob just said, "Yeah, I'll copy those taikos. We'll move them up. What tempo were you at? Oh, we're at a 137. Yeah. Great, done. Where's your mod? Great." And we had this really lovely transition.
Nice.
That kind of cooperation is really wonderful.
Was this a native Atmos mix? Were you guys?
It was not. It started in Sydney in a studio that did not have Atmos, so we were wedded to the 5.1 mix.
Well, if I can even go back, maybe you don't even know this. So when I set up my studio to start off with, I thought this is going to be an Atmos job, so I'm going to do everything in 7.1. Right? So I actually set up my small room in 7.1.
I didn't know that.
And I went, oh, this is going to get really hard.
Yeah.
And of course Wayne went, oh, no, don't do it. So then it became 5.1, and it stayed 5.1.
It did.
Until you left.
And it stayed 5.1, and it stayed 5.1 through Warner Brothers 11 and 12. And the Atmos and the 7.1 were up mixes.
Interesting.
We just didn't have time. Every minute of mixing was spent with George working on the concepts. Yeah, concepts.
Do you cut any differently if you know you're going to be working in Atmos?
I do organizationally. I don't really cut any differently because I prepare pretty immersively. I have a lot of material that I know can go in all those sidewall and rear wall channels and overhead channels. If it's not going to be in Atmos, there's other places we can put it. But I cut differently in that I will create separate sets of object tracks because I have to keep those isolated. Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's all the questions I had. You happy, Michael?
That's great.
Any last thoughts?
If I can just say something, I'm just really grateful to Mark and to Greg and to Chris for just pulling it together, and because I think it's just a kick-ass soundtrack. I love it. I think it sounds great. And the thing that I really love is that it's got dynamics. It breathes. You can hear all the dialogue. When it wants to be loud, it's bloody loud.
But it's not ear-shatteringly loud.
It's not ear-shatteringly loud. It just really works.
We haven't really given Greg Rudolph and Chris Jenkins many props in this because we're only half of this. But those guys spent 75 days in final mix, and it's as much their mixes and soundtrack as it is ours. Yeah. We could not have gotten this movie. Wouldn't sound like this without those guys.
Not. I mean, this is the thing that's amazing, right? So, when you get another character, another person coming onto a film soundtrack, particularly in the mix department, they have their whole set of ideas and their style and all that sort of stuff, and things that you wouldn't expect. You suddenly hear them and go, geez, that's a good idea.
Yeah, they were both loaded with great ideas.
And the soundtrack is filled with their great ideas. So, my hat's off to those two. They really pulled a great mix.
Well, it sounds like it was a great experience.
It's funny. I realized that something strange happened on that mix that I'd never experienced. Having studied acting a little bit, I've learned about this notion of being in the moment, where you're so the character that the rest of the world disappears. We ended up with something like that on our final mix stage, where literally we were all collected there, and we were like one brain, one mind, with one purpose. We were so connected, we were so clear on what we wanted to achieve. We were finishing each other's sentences, and it was like before the words come out, it'd be like, oh yeah, great idea, man. I've never experienced that in my life.
That happens on about day 70 of the final mix. So you finally break through that point.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a super fun conversation. I really thank you guys for coming in. Mark Mangini, David White, nominated for an Academy Award for Best Sound Editing on Mad Max Fury Road. Good luck to you at the Oscars. Thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you so much.